Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. Empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
I'm your host, Joanne Leon.
And on today's episode, January 17th, 2018, we discuss the ongoing costs of empire. And we start with a interesting study by the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University, a project called The Costs of War, which has been, I guess, one of the few places that I see, at least, accumulating all the different, or trying to provide a larger picture. And in November of 2017, they had actually put out an estimate saying the budgetary costs of the post 9/11 wars through fiscal year 2018 is going to be $5.6 trillion, which is a lot of money. The U.S. wars in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and the increased spending on Homeland Security and the Department of Defense, State, and Veterans Affairs since the 9/11 attacks have cost more than $4.3 trillion in current dollars through fiscal year 2017, said Netta Crawford, Cost of War co-director, adding likely costs for fiscal year 2018, the estimated future obligations of veterans care, the costs of war total more than $5.6 trillion. And the same Watson Institute presented a map, which obviously we can't see. It's a podcast, so you can't.
I'll put it in the show notes.
What was supposed to be a son of Al Qaeda in 2001 has massively spanned. A little excerpt from the an article that I've written at Tom's Dispatch, quote, "Seeing Our Wars for the First Time," which is about this map that the Brown University group produced. Quote, "The Cost of War project has produced not just a map of the war on terror, but the first map of its kind ever. It offers an astounding vision of Washington's counter-terror across the globe. A glance at the map tells you about the war on terror." And so if you look at it, you can see that it goes from South Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and deep into West Africa, where only recently 4 Green Berets died in an ambush in Niger. So since 2001 to now 2018, we've spent almost $6 trillion. We have troops in numerous new countries. We've started new wars. Wars have started, not just the Iraq War, but the Syrian Civil War, which is part of that, the Libyan, Yemen, Somalia has been destabilized. So, Joanne, it's been 17 years now. How's the war on terror going?
Well, at this point I object to it being called the war on terror. It's not a war on terror. I call it empire preservation wars or empire maintenance, basically. But you can't say that. Well, for lots of reasons. People won't pay for it. Other countries don't have cover. Nobody has cover if you call it empire maintenance, or I don't even know if you can say maintenance anymore. At this point, I think it's empire preservation, an attempt to. And what did you ask me again? I got off on a tangent there.
I was saying we've been fighting this war on terror now for 17 years, since 2001, since in the aftermath, that was the invasion of Afghanistan, the passing of the Patriot Act, and the sort of imperial mobilization. And we've done it for 17 years. It's cost now. We have some of the figures that, thanks to this Brown University group, the Watson Institute, we have some of the figures of what this has actually cost. We're now $6 trillion in. We've invaded, Afghanistan, Iraq. There's been, I would say the Libyan invasion is part of the war on terror, although that's an interesting discussion. Yemen, which I think is to soothe the Saudis for our failure to intervene in Syria, partly. Also a proxy war with Iran. But even before that, Yemen became a free fire zone for drone strikes. Somalia, Niger, where we had these guys killed who are apparently part of this anti-Boko Haram. I don't know what even group they're fighting over there now. So it's kind of, it's 2018 now. This is the first show of 2018. What do you think of the war on terror and our efficacy?
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't think it is a war on terror. I think it's empire preservation. And I think, or I hope, that that's becoming more apparent. Like, I think there are some actual silver, like Glenn Greenwald said one time, there are some silver linings to this Trump presidency and that train wreck of an election that led up to it. I think people are taking about maybe a little bit more honest look at things that they didn't want to look at under Obama, and they're starting to see that this war on terror is a sham. So I do think that it's an empire preservation war, but that doesn't even cover it, Dan, because you have to take into consideration that we are an arms industry.
Yeah, right. That's what's surprised
Our
me.
economy now. And it's not just to make people rich anymore. It's like, if you really cut down on the arms trade, our economy goes into a tailspin, I think. So that's really a catch-22.
Yeah, but that's kind of an interesting point about this, which is how much Trump has changed things, meaning he's damaged, symbolically, he's pissed people off, he's damaged some relationships. But what surprised me is how easy it is to put the empire on autopilot. Like, you don't need to have this thing kind of runs itself. He basically says, let the military run things. And they do it. And they're running operations. And when these guys in Niger got killed, I really had the distinct impression that he didn't even know about the operation and couldn't even really justify what he didn't have. Forget justify. He didn't have a rationale for the entire forces other than a sort of general vague, there's an anti-terrorism operations going on in Africa, North Africa. So it's kind of a question of, it's horrible. We need the best man for the job. But the empire, that one of the things that surprised me is how well it's run without an actual president. That this thing kind of runs itself. That the Pentagon, they push the paper, they do what they have to do. It's kind of a mindless thing. That surprised me a little bit.
Well, you're making an argument for a deep state, essentially.
Well, deep state in the sense that, yes, structurally, deep state to me always is like political actors who have an agenda. I just think like there's so many people who just go about their business making the trains run on time, if you like. Like, they don't even, like, we're just doing our thing. Okay, we're in Afghanistan. Well, with the Afghanistan, we're just going to keep going to war. Okay, we go out in these ambushes. It reminds me a lot of kind of some of the more banal parts of the Vietnam War as expressed in that Ken Burns documentary. It's like, well, we just go up, we go to the hills, we shoot, some of us get killed, we go back. Then tomorrow we wake up, we go to the hills. Like, that's the part that's kind of surprised me, that it's been able to be on autopilot, even with someone who's very disruptive, which Trump is. Like, they just go about the motions. The military's doing its thing. They don't really need the commander, even when the commander-in-chief, as a news story, insults the widow or the mother of a slain soldier or whatever the hell happened with that Niger soldier. Like, okay, well, that's upsetting, but, we're still going to punch the clock. It's punching the clock is what it's the empire is so clockwork. That's what surprised me a little bit. That it was this so well organized and so well functioning that even Trump at the top of it couldn't kick a few gears loose.
Well, that kind of goes along with my empire maintenance theory, I guess. It's I find it curious. It doesn't surprise me that the empire runs regardless of who is president, because, the bureaucracy and all that. It's the policy setting that surprises me, because he talked a lot about intervention. There are two possibilities. He didn't mean a word of it, or someone convinced him later that things weren't going to be that way. We weren't going to tone down our intervention strategies. So,
look at the flip on Afghanistan. Look at the flip on Afghanistan, where he said throughout the whole campaign, why are we there? Why are we there? And then he gives this big speech about, well, maybe we need to be there.
Did he talk about Afghanistan in the campaign? I
Yeah,
know he
he
talked
wanted to
about
get out. He
Syria a
wanted to
lot.
get out. He said there was no point in being there. And
Uh,
he was a total 180. I mean, of course, his, people who don't like Trump, like spike the football and like, ha ha, ha, you reversed your position. But like, it's amazing. Yeah, he's kind of been captured. I remember when we interviewed John Kiriakou and he said the CIA recruits presidents.
right. Yeah,
Like,
he did say that.
they got, like, it just seems so. So on the one hand, yes, the empire runs on its own. It doesn't matter who's president. On the other hand, from that deep state critique, man, it does really look like a group of people got together, got rid of Flynn, got him out. Someone leaked something, got rid of Flynn, got these other people out. Much of his national security team has been purged. And now it's these neocon generals, McMaster, John Kelly, running the show. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it
So I think
is.
so. Now it does seem like they've tamed Trump. And the funny thing is, like, they've tamed him enough to where they're kind of willing to accept the rest of him. Like, it almost seems like the deep state's made peace with the idea of Trump. Like, well, he's going to do some Twitter stuff sometimes. Well, that's going to be very destabilizing and unfortunate, but ultimately we're going to get to do what we want to do anyway. So I guess we'll live with this for 4 years.
Well, I think the vote on the surveillance authorization, the 702 part of the thing, I think that was very telling because you had all the same people who were saying that Trump, I mean, they were making the kinds of alarmist accusations and warnings about Trump that I've ever heard in my whole adult life, calling him from Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini. I mean, you name it, everything.
Yeah.
And then when
They
it
voted
came
to give him the power. They voted to give him the power.
When it came time to rein in, even just a little bit, to rein in those powers, even after Trump still does believe that the Obama administration used and abused the state surveillance apparatus to spy on his campaign and to meddle in the elections, right? But I can see why Trump might want to keep those powers for himself. Of course, I think every president in that, but especially him. I could see him saying, all right, if that's the way you're going to play the game, then I'm going to do the same thing when the next election comes around.
He's going to spy on the press. Why wouldn't he do what Nixon did?
He could spy on anybody, right? So, but what I can't understand is why the quote unquote, the Mick resistance, we call them, who have said that this man is going to, is the worst person in the world. And they've thrown out every possible hyperbolic warning and accusation that is possible to do. And then they turned around and they voted to give him these surveillance powers to keep them. That makes less than 0 cents. How can that possibly be? People like Adam Schiff. How can he possibly? Did he give an explanation? I you know what? I didn't check to see.
I haven't heard it. I mean, he probably is. I don't see him saying anything. I think he's just going to say, "Well, we have to protect our country."
Well, I think he's probably more likely just, this shithole thing that really blew up. I think most people are talking a whole lot more than that than about this contradictory vote on surveillance powers. But who does definitely want those surveillance powers to remain and, if anything, expand? The intelligence community, the deep state. So I wonder who won the battle. And that's just, I hardly even have any words for that.
No, I think the answer is clear. They don't really believe it. Adam Schiff and Senator Mark Warner and all these other Russiagate folks don't really believe their rhetoric, but they do believe in the national security state, and they do believe in this imperialism. So they really believe that, but they don't really believe Trump is that bad. I think it's total hyperbole. I think it's fake. crocodile tears from Schiff and Warner. So when push comes to shove, they're like, well, we don't really believe he's an agent of the Kremlin. I mean, if you really believe Trump was an agent of the Kremlin, could you give him 702 powers again? Would you give him this mass surveillance power if you really believe it? Or if you were just some prima donna whiner like Schiff and Warner and these other people who were at the Russiagate, wouldn't you just say, yeah, whatever, but that's just politics. We need this power to just protect us from terrorists. We don't want there to be another terrorist attack, and then we get blamed, and they'll say, Adam Schiff, you voted against the 702 power. That could have prevented this attack in Los Angeles. Oh, well, I vote, I think that's part of it's a cover your ass type thing, and they don't really believe Trump is an existential danger, but they do really think terrorism is a bad political issue. And if there is another terrorist attack and they voted against it, that's my guess.
Well, I mean, they've taken it to such extremes, and the trend has been escalation. Things get more and more extreme. The next time they need to fearmonger and say, don't vote, they don't say vote for us because we're going to do this for you. They say, vote for us because that other guy is dangerous, the most dangerous person in the world, the most horrible, dangerous person in the world. That's the campaign of the Democratic Party now. Well, what are they going to do next time around, Dan? What's next? What's left? Did they call it? Maybe did anyone call him Satan? Maybe they can. I don't know. Where can they go from here? It seems like they have exhausted.
Nothing. They're hysterical, but I mean, it doesn't matter. They're basically betting on the fact that they don't have to do anything. People are just going to vote against Trump because he's so offensive. And maybe they're right. I mean, the midterms are coming up. Maybe there will be a Democratic sweep. Maybe not. I don't know. If 2016, if there's one lesson from 2016, is to be cautious about polls. But we'll see. I just think that it's hilarious that they can try to hold those two positions. And the only reason I think they're even trying is because they think the media doesn't care, or the media, I don't know, for some reason, which I think is generally true. I've only seen The Intercept is the only outlet I've seen, a major outlet, that has taken it to task for claiming Trump is the greatest threat to humanity and then voting to give him incredible mass surveillance powers.
Yeah, there aren't too many people bringing that up. They're too busy talking about shithole, the word, that whole thing, because that is the biggest problem in the world right now, apparently.
I think that one's fading, by the way. It's going to be a new scandal. It's going to be a new outrage.
Yeah.
Probably by the time this airs.
Well, I get my kicks out of the whole craziness too, because I mean, that's how you keep your sanity. But here's getting back to the Cost of War project by Brown University. I thought Tom Dispatch's take on this was particularly interesting because, he looked at this thing and he's like, you know what? This is the first time anybody ever did this. It's the first time anybody ever put all this information together into a map and tried to make it very coherent. And that's why he calls it seeing our wars for the first time. And I thought that was a very interesting take. So I am gonna, this point's gonna make sense in a minute. But so, some of it's funny in a I don't know, whatever that's called, a gallows humor way. But here's the thing. Look at the contrast on the latest outrage and the amount of press coverage it gets and priority it gets. And then look at this multi-trillion-dollar war. It's not only the money. I mean, there are 100 different ways why this is a destructive policy. I mean, how do you even use words big enough to emphasize how huge a thing it is? And yet none of this media, none of them took the time to really bring this to light, to present it in an honest light. I mean, and so I can't laugh anymore. That makes me really, really angry. And frankly, I think that the Brown University stuff is understated in a way. I think, that's the wrong way to put it. It's not understated. The way they reported it was, for the 56 countries, they said that we have some kind of counter-terror activity in 56 countries. Well, we know that we have special forces in, what was it? 3 digits, I know that. I don't have that number on me. But we have special operations forces. Oh, here we go. American Special Operations Forces were deployed to 149 countries in 2017 alone. So that 56 is like a third of that, right? So they made their criteria. There has to be some kind of active fighting against terrorism or training against terrorism for a country to get counted. And obviously some of these special operations forces are either they have a different mission or they can't be counted because the missions are covert and no one can confirm them. So I think they're even understating this when they say 76 countries, 76 countries, 39% of the world's countries, and the 5.6 trillion. So that's why I'm losing my sense of humor on this altogether. And instead of winding it down, or there's no end in sight. In fact, you've got one of the scariest things I thought, and Tom Dispatch brought it up. The Marine Corps Commandant, General Neller, when they had some type of an exercise over in Norway, and he told the U.S. troops in Norway, and I guess he was pointing at Russia and pointing to Russia. I think he physically was pointing to Russia, but he's referring to Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. He told these troops to expect a, quote, big-ass fight in the future. And he says, I hope I'm wrong, but there's a war coming. So, and then McMaster's been stirring up the possibility of a war with North Korea. We just had South Korea announce that North and South Korea are going to, I think the first announcement was one of their teams is going to be a joint North and South Korea team, I think women's hockey. And now I think they're going to enter under a United Korea flag, the Olympics. I mean, that's huge. That's really huge. And you can tell that there are people in our foreign policy world who aren't happy about that. I mean, the rest of the world's like, this is great, and then you have these war hawks, everyone's afraid they're going to sabotage it somehow. It's unbelievable. I think maybe I took us a little bit off track there.
Yeah, I don't know where we are anymore.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
You said, how's the war on terror going? That's where we started. And I was saying that the contrast between how much outrage there is about the shithole statements. That just happens to be the latest one. I mean, this happens like every week, maybe. The contrast
but the press doesn't care about, fundamentally the press doesn't, they're, in some cases they're collaborators, but they're mostly, they're just prostitutes for ratings. They made Trump president. They gave Trump $1 billion of free media.
But it's not just the media, though. It's
but politicians just respond to the media. The politicians aren't independent people. Very few of them have any agency, to be quite honest. Most of them are puppets for larger interests.
Wasn't Durbin the one who got this whole thing rolling?
I think Durbin did it to try to. I think Durbin and a lot of Democrats think that leaking that is sabotaging him, and he's going to give in on DACA, the Dreamers, and stuff like that. But that's not Trump's style. Trump doesn't do that. So it probably ended up helping the hardliners who didn't want that deal. Like that, leaking that comment, if it did happen, and Dick Durbin is a total piece of shit liar. So I don't know if it did happen, but I totally would believe that Trump would say it. It's totally believable that he would say it.
Yeah, I could go either way. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like something he would say. But
I can believe he would say it, and I can also believe that
that Durbin lied. Yeah, I can believe either one.
Easily.
I can believe either one easily. But that blows up a deal, so it doesn't hurt them. In any case, that we're getting off the point. In any case, Trump's outrages. The media is a participant, and politicians like it too. They get to go on TV. Adam Schiff. That's the whole point. his politics align with Trump. Jeff Flake gave a speech today comparing Donald Trump's contempt for the media to Joseph Stalin. Flake votes with Trump over 90% of the time he has Trump's position, according to 538. So you tell me, is this really about cultures and norms and standing up and resistance? Or is it about an opportunity to get on TV for these press-hungry politicians? And the press likes it because they like sensationalism. I think it is.
Well,
I think
Flake is retiring, though, right? Is he going to
he's
do
going to
it?
become a lobbyist. Is there any doubt? Is there a single shred of doubt in anyone's mind that he's going to try to cash in on his Senate career?
Well, maybe he's going to challenge Trump in 2020 in a primary, maybe.
I don't even know if he's that stupid because Jeff Flake is not popular or well liked, and the reason he's retiring is because the evidence is overwhelming that he was going to get creamed in a Republican primary. So he was either retire or lose.
So what was his motivation for the? I saw his name was trending, but I didn't know what he did.
He gave another one of his dumbass speeches about the dangers of authoritarianism, and then it doesn't. At this point, it's not even interesting because
it's true
because he doesn't have a future. One, so his positions don't matter, and two, he votes with Trump, so Democrats hate him and liberals hate him anyway. And three, he's just as a person not a very interesting, compelling person. But the point is, the overall point, to get back to it, is Trump plays with the media and the media plays with Trump, and they love each other. And it's this fake conflict because they pretend they hate Trump, but they need Trump. And Trump's actually aware of this. He actually said, they're going to help me in 2020 because they want me. And they do, because the ratings, New York Times has record numbers of subscribers. So is the Washington Post. CNN's getting great ratings, which they said in a leaked recording. They liked the Russia stuff because it was good ratings. That was, I think, the Project Veritas stuff. But so it's like an open conspiracy amongst people to sort of distort the debate into the stupidest it could possibly be for ratings and publicity and attention for the politicians and the media apparatchiks. So stuff like the Brown University study, which is really important, it's just going to piss people off if they run it. And two, it doesn't give them ratings. They don't think, at least. So they have every reason not to report on it and every reason to talk about shithole.
Yeah, but they can ramp up any subject that if they really want to, like with Russiagate. They can ramp it up. And anyway.
Yeah, but why would they want to ramp up this subject, though? What is in it for them to ramp up that, the U.S. there, and it's been 17 years of a total waste of money?
Because Trump just showed that if you tell even just a little bit of truth and say that it makes sense to pull back on the interventionism, it's hugely, overwhelmingly popular in this country. And you could win elections by landslides if you were a halfway decent candidate.
Yeah, but anti-imperialism isn't good for the corporate media.
Right.
So why the hell would they want to cover it? But I think it's a mix of those two things. It's not good for them really, and two, I don't think it would generate. I'd love to have seen it on CNN, but I doubt it's going to happen. So I think these are. You said you're upset about the reports, but I just think we're not going to ever get. I think it's in its nature to not care about that. It's in its nature to sensationalize and try to ring the, bell with profits. They got to make money, and so Russiagate makes money.
Well, we have a whole pretty large alternative media ecosystem now too, and I don't see many people.
I don't see it.
Really? There's a million podcasts and YouTube channels.
Yeah, but
there's a massive alternative media going on.
And they're trying everything they can to kill what's little left of it. They're trying to kill it on YouTube.
If it wasn't significant, why would they be trying to smother it in the crib?
Yeah, that's true. So I don't think they're going to cover the Brown University study or anything like that. But more importantly, I think the larger conversation is one they don't want to have, which is the costs of empire. And in this case, that really means how much does it cost a year? They say we don't have money for this. We don't have money.
Right.
for welfare. We don't have money for health insurance. There's for people who don't know, the children's health insurance program has been defunded. So CHIP, that was a very popular program that's been defunded currently. There might be a deal to refund it to avoid a shutdown this week. So, but it's been defunded for months. So these things, we don't have enough money for this. Folks, every year, $700 billion, really more,
A lot more.
goes to the Pentagon. That's enough for 10 welfare states. And it's funny is that there's some sort of not weird, bipartisan consensus, including the progressive think tanks, who never say anything about all this money going to empire. What's the cost of empire? Forget the blood and treasure and the blood and the ethics of killing people who don't deserve to be killed, although you should think about that. There's your universal health coverage. $5.6 trillion. That could have paid to have everyone on Medicare easily.
Well, everybody always
5.6
asks the
trillion.
questions. These other developed countries, how come they can do it and we can't? Well, there's your answer right there.
Yeah, they don't have a fucking Pentagon that's siphoning off $1 trillion a year.
They don't have troops in over 149 countries last year alone, and actively fighting or training for counterterrorism in 76 countries. They think that's crazy. Or they just, they're happy to let us do it and just ride the tide with that.
Yeah, but I wonder about that free rider thing, because to believe the free rider thing that Trump always talks about they're not paying their share. They're not paying. They're ripping us off. They're treating us like babies. Like, but really, like, are these threats even serious in most cases? In some cases, the serious threats seem to be the result of military intervention, like ISIS. But
yeah, of course.
in the other cases, like Boko Haram, why does anyone care about that? I mean, is a national security threat to the United States?
No, it's not. It's not a real war on terror. They just can't sell it if they say what it really is. So, it's not. None of that is
So
real.
right. So like the idea, like but that goes to the point.
Well, no, I shouldn't
So
say none of
if
that.
you're free
Let me be
riding,
precise. It's not that it's not real. It's just, it's a tiny threat. More people die in bathtub accidents than in,
right?
by terror.
Then they're not free riders, because the threat that we're paying for isn't legitimate in a holistic sense. So they're not actually, enjoying our little. I guess you could say the one thing you could say is, well, China enjoyed us cracking open Iraq and opening up contracting opportunities they might not have had. Iran certainly. I mean, if there's any free riders of U.S. policy stupidity, it's Iran, who has benefited continually from us doing some. I mean, we overthrew their number one adversary in the region, Saddam. Now we've cracked open what's left of the borders. I mean, now Iran basically has built new alliances throughout Syria and everywhere else. I mean, they already had those alliances, but now they're more secure. So they're the only free riders, and they're indirect. For the most part, the rest of the world doesn't spend this kind of money on empire and militaries and mass surveillance, because you don't need to do it to be a successful country. You don't need to do this stuff. It's not making us a successful country. I would really, the cost, we know what the upfront costs of these imperial budgets are. $1 trillion for the Pentagon and hundreds of billions for the surveillance systems, NSA, CIA. Remember, that $1 trillion is just the Pentagon. That's the rest of it. NSA, CIA, the rest of it. But more importantly, we're spending all this money. We have to pay for it later when we have things like 9/11, which is a direct, blowback, if you like, from CIA operations in the Middle East. What the hell? Nobody else has to do this stuff because there's no real upside for it. They can have great countries without spending the money. So I totally reject the thesis that, well, we're doing it so they don't have to.
Well, here's the thing.
I think there's no reason to do it at all.
The military budgets and activities and intelligence everything that goes along with it. It's not really about terrorism. Like Gareth Porter said, they don't really care about terrorism. It's the maintenance of an empire. And they do care about that. Some countries do. Particularly, I mean, just let's look at the UK and France. France, for their part, they seem to be trying to resurge their empire. They don't ever seem to have accepted that they, you know what I'm saying? They have an exaggerated role because of their position on the UN Security Council, and everybody's trying to maintain the way things have been since post World War II. So I'm that's what I'm talking about. I just don't see it in the whole military terror war. I don't see it that way anymore. I just I can't. That's just a fantasy. It's not even a fantasy. It's a front. Not that terror, that there is no terror. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that in no way, I'm agreeing with you that in no way does the amount of military activity that we have right now is justified by the threat, the terror threat. And in fact, it's not at all effective. It has increased terrorism. Then come the Syria war really pulled back another curtain, which was that the most difficult thing to do is to put effective forces on the ground. Everybody's problem is, well, who's going to go? They want to fight these wars, but nobody wants to deploy their troops, particularly in the Middle East. And so the most effective fighting forces happen to be who? Oh, the terrorists. The ones you say you're fighting, and then it really gets crazy. And that's what happened that's the curtain that got pulled back with the Syria war, at least for the people who were really watching. So anyway, I can't look at it as a war on terror anymore. So as far as the free ride thing, I think there are some countries that, we need allies. We need people to stay by our side, and whether they like what we're doing or not. And so there have to be some big benefits for some countries, some staunch allies, the special relationship countries, for example. And, I think they are getting it. There's no way that the UK and France would be one of the 5 most powerful countries in the world without, this NATO alliance and it's smaller than NATO. It's the UN Security Council countries.
Yeah, but that's when when that was set up, they were powers in the world. But they're not any kind of power. They shouldn't, if you had to do it again, they wouldn't be on the UN Security Council. They shouldn't be on the UN Security Council. But I'm not even sure they benefit that much. Their people do, at least. The only thing they are is arms dealers too. The British and the French are big time arms dealers, so it's good to be there. It's good to have your options open when you're on the Security Council if you're going to make up a good percentage of your economy in arms dealing.
So the French defense budget is 1.82% of GDP, and the 2018 budget compares to an initial 2017 defense budget of 32.7 billion euros.
Nothing.
Which recently took on an unexpected cut of 850 million euros on equipment orders, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah. And I think the UK spent, for the size of the country, that's a huge budget.
30 billion? No. I don't think they're not spending serious money. 30 billion?
So the kind of power that they wield for what they spend, it's completely out of whack. And so I would agree that there are some countries that
you think
are
they
getting
free
a really
ride?
good deal. Well, to some extent, yeah. But I don't think that's true of most countries. Some argument, but to lump everybody into that, forget it.
I don't buy the idea that there's enough threat to you could even be a free ride. Like, what is the threat to France or the UK, really?
What's the purpose of the military? What's the purpose of the Western countries' militaries? Is it to keep us safe? Or is it to run an empire and secure certain areas so that their corporations can do what they need to
Well,
do.
in the U.S. case, it's to open up trade and business for American corporations and the commercial oligarchy that this country's always had. But I wonder if in the new France and the new UK, the post World War II, I mean, remember France tried to reclaim its colonies for among other places, Vietnam, and was beaten. I mean, they were blown out. They were blown out. Dien Bien Phu. That was the end of the French Empire. Essentially, they still try to play a role in the Ivory Coast and the other things, but these empires are gone. It's really the U.S. empire that's left, but the U.S. empire's justification, at least post World War II, was the Cold War.
You can still try to hang on to whatever bits of it you can. I mean, France is still pretty influential in some African countries. Yeah, so what is the year of this? And look at the 2017 fact sheet. So they have us down for 611 billion. We know that that's about half of what really is.
611 billion is a hell of a lot of money.
Oh my God. Yeah, I know, but it's nowhere near what the real spending is. Like if
Well, it
you,
doesn't have ancillary costs and the black budget, and so who even knows how much it is.
yeah, all the things
But
you
even
mentioned. How
just
about the veterans, costs, all the,
oh yeah, those people, the people who come back and need care for the rest of their lives because they were so
yeah, all the
brutalized either
pensions
mentally or
and the
physically.
vet. And China is 215 billion. So one third now, assuming that they are telling the truth about how much they spend, 215 billion. And then the next one's Russia at 70 billion. The next one is Saudi Arabia at 64 billion. And then India at 56 billion. India has a billion people, so, and then
So
France.
we spend more than $600 billion more a year than Russia.
Yeah.
And we are the pitiful victim of the
10
Great
times as
Bear.
much. And that's with the lowball estimate. That's with the
Right, that's what this.
deceiving estimate. But for example, India and France spend roughly the same amount on their defense budget. And the
Well, like I said,
UK,
the top five UN Security Council members, right? The Permanent Security Council,
yeah,
people with the veto, are the top five biggest arms dealers in the world. It's a fact. So the US, number one, biggest arms dealer. UK, France, China, Russia, these are the biggest arms dealers in the world. They make a lot of money selling weapons all over the world. So it's kind of odd for them to be on the Security Council because they're supposed to be, because their business is creating insecurity by selling weapons.
I mean that's what it's evolved to. Yeah,
That's not what's involved in. It's always been a cynical game. I mean, I totally reject the idea that there were ever good intentions, but yes, if there were ever good intentions, those intentions are long gone. I think they were. I mean, I think it's a cynical game. I think you get on the Security Council, you have this lots of power to stop people from sanctioning your allies, which is to say your clients, people you're selling guns to,
right.
right? It's one of the reasons you couldn't get a Sudan resolution is China has oil access. Darfur, remember that one
Yeah,
was a big deal. People forgot about that, but there was a genocide in
yeah,
the
of
Sudan called the
course, yeah,
Darfur genocide. And, China was, well, China, it's a human rights. Well, no, we want access to that oil. Forget you. And also, we want to sell weapons to our allies there. And of course, so there's a clear conflict. It's like the clearest conflict of interest. The five biggest arms dealers are all the five Security Council members.
yeah. And the other thing that nobody ever brings up is the whole, the trafficking. There's a lot of contraband that gets trafficked in this world. Weapons being one of them. The old Soviet weapon stashes in the Eastern European country. I mean, that was like a bonanza. People going after those and selling them. And of course, there's the heroin and other drug trafficking. There's human trafficking. That I think that should always be considered. It should be part of the picture.
Well, it's in part of
Um,
imperialism too. I mean, in terms of the U.S. role, I mean, one of the reasons that the international drug trade that is tolerated and possibly participated in. There's been a lot of scandals in the U.S. because it's because as much money as they're pouring into this empire, they always want some off the books money. And drugs and drug dealing and doing deals with drug cartels, that's a big deal. Famously, when the Iran-Contra thing happened and the United States Congress finally said, the Civil War in Nicaragua, finally said, we're cutting off money. The Boland Amendment, which was passed, and said, we're no longer funding the Contras in Nicaragua. They're terrorists. They're killing people mercilessly. Not only did they sell arms to Iran, which was under sanctions to get money, this is Ali Noor's deal, they also did business with the Contras and let the Contras sell cocaine. And one of the first things the Contras were involved in doing was introducing crack into the United States. This is the famous Gary Webb, the Dark Alliance features. And why do they like that money? Why do they like drug money? Because it's off the books.
I think that was a turning point, really, when Congress said no, to try to exercise their war powers, right? Through the budget, which everyone always, the fantasy or view of this country is that Congress controls the purse strings. Well, that's one clear example.
It has the power to declare war, right? It has the power to declare war, in theory.
That, and to maintain, to sustain a war. Technically, you can't keep a war going without Congress agreeing to it. Well, it got tested right there.
Yeah, and the response from the Reagan administration was, we'll go around you.
Yeah, exactly.
And now that was a time when Congress was a lot less compliant. Sort of go back to the first point about the war on terror. For those who don't know, for what the legal authorization is, there's a 2001 amendment passed in the wake of 9/11 that is authorized the most random stuff. So Libya was authorized under 2001. Syria intervention was authorized.
There was a UN resolution for that, Security Council resolution for Libya, but they swore it was not regime change.
Yeah, whoop-de-doo.
but they probably still use that AUMF.
Right, but remember when Obama was going to bomb? This was I thought a turning point. I wished, clearly not. A turning point against American intervention when Obama was saying he was going to bomb Syria in response to this quote-unquote chemical weapons attack. He said, I don't need to go to Congress, because he said, I don't need to go to Congress because this is authorized in the 2001 AUMF authorization use of military force. But then his people said, and I guess he said also, like, Jesus, if I use the 2001, Congress is going to eat me alive. I want them with blood on their hands too. So I'm going to go in and demand a resolution. And he did, and Congress told him to piss off. And it was a glorious moment in our history, fleeting though it was, when they basically, Congress actually, not legally, but politically took out his legs.
Yeah.
Because that's what he was looking for. He wanted Congress to authorize it so he could say, don't blame me. Congress authorized the bill.
Yeah.
You can't blame me for this. Like, it's like, no. And Congress, because it was Republicans probably, said, nah, we're not authorizing it. And that is when the 2001 AUMF was tested. I mean, here's the thing. He felt like legally he could have done it. Right? He said, I have the legal authority to start a war in Syria with U.S. forces based on this 2001 authorization military force. He just didn't have the political capital to do it. But legally speaking, that is what, for those who don't know, that's what's underlined and justifies legally all these interventions is this resolution. It's not even a freaking bill. It's a resolution saying go after the people who struck us on 9/11.
And passed at a time when the country was absolutely traumatized. Yeah. They quickly pushed that through. I don't think at the time.
People are all dead. The 9/11 Al Qaeda is dead, including Osama bin Laden. How is that 2001 still a legitimate legal document?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a whole subject of its own. And there's been some recent discussions about repealing that but replacing with something probably even more flexible. So
something probably worse that'll last another 17 years.
Yeah, I mean, Princeton's right. We really are not a democracy anymore. But another little aspect of it, again, Tom Dispatch mentions this. He talks about when Pence went to Afghanistan to visit the troops right before Christmas, like 4 days before Christmas. And 16 years we've been in that country. We've had a military presence and bases in that country. First of all, they still have to sneak in secretly because people can still set off bombs at or near air bases and airfields. So they don't even, the story of Pence being in Afghanistan was embargoed until like an hour after he left. But here's the other interesting thing. Dispatch describes Pence, his speech to the troops there. He says, before a 40-foot American flag addressing 500 American troops, Vice President Mike Pence praised them as, quote, the world's greatest force for good, unquote. It boasted that American airstrikes had recently been, quote, dramatically increased, unquote. Swore that their country was here to stay and insisted that, quote, victory is closer than ever before, unquote. As an observer noted, however, the response of his audience was subdued. That's the literal word they used. Quote, several troops stood with their arms crossed or their hands folded behind their backs and listened, but did not applaud, unquote. So back to that whole issue of the empire needs a military to maintain and preserve itself. But it's hard to get people to fight for the empire, particularly an empire that has a 1% or, a very concentrated wealth, and most people don't benefit very much from it. Also, this was 4 days before Christmas, right? I could just imagine what was going through the minds of the troops there. And there's a number of things that all can be separate episodes because there's so much about them, but it's important to just kind of bring them up. The morale of the military has to be kept up, right? Also, you have to be able to recruit enough ground forces. And I think it's, Lawrence Wilkerson with another, I forget who the other author is, but they've written a couple of things, and more recently it was that the all-volunteer army is not sustainable from a cost standpoint and also from a morale standpoint. You have a tiny percentage of the population serving in the military. It's just not a sustainable long-term thing. So,
they're not going to do the draft again. They're not that stupid.
And the one other, there's a
that'll
dilemma.
That'll end it overnight. That'll end it overnight.
It's a dilemma, though. I mean, that's what he's talking about. He can't go back to the draft because you can't maintain your never-ending wars. Even if I don't know. I don't know if I was going to say even if.
But aren't there enough poor people to join the military? I mean, that's the whole thing about the inequality is. See, the problem with the military started complaining about in the 90s, not that the 90s were in any way, shape, or form a golden age, but because unemployment was very low and inequality wasn't that bad, they couldn't find anybody to do it. Now, people are really desperate and broke and stagnant. I imagine they could get easier time finding recruits now than they could when the economy is good. In fact, the fact that we're now technically at full employment is never good for the military recruiting because the military the military needs people who are desperate, either to go to college or to have a job, just generally to have a job. That's why a lot of these people
health insurance.
That's one of these. It's interesting. A lot of these people. I remember when the Abu Ghraib pictures came out, and all these people, Lindsey England, and all these other low-ranking people were in these photos with the detainees, and Donald Rumsfeld got off scot-free, and all the Bush elite were completely off the hook. And then he said, well, look at all the people who are eating it for this. It's all these people from West Virginia and all these real working-class poor people. Not that what they did was in any way excusable, but they're the ones who are the face of this scandal. When clearly these policies were interrogation policies. These people didn't just walk in to a prison and start torturing people in this systematic way. They were told to do it by superiors. So that's what I always think of with Lindsey England and these other people who were in Abu Ghraib, or Jessica Lynch, who was not in Abu Ghraib but was rescued from West Virginia, right? There's these poor working class people. So when you have a society with lots of inequality, that's the recruiting pool, right?
Yeah, well, of course, the active duty troops are disproportionately from poor areas, and I don't have all the numbers and facts in front of me, though. It's on my list of things to do an episode on. But there's like an enormous percentage, outsized percentage of people from Alabama in the U.S. military, for example. And that it's not just Alabama, but that's just a really good example, stark example. But we also saw it one other time, and that was that time you just referred to a little while ago in the lead up to the regime change operation in Syria in 2013 in late August and early September. And I remember reading, I believe it was the Congressman Walter Jones from North Carolina. His district is a large amount of military people there. And he said that for the first time, active duty people were calling his office outraged or, very motivated to oppose the regime change operation. What they knew would have been an invasion. First, it was going to start with airstrikes.
Right. Well, they didn't. Right. They didn't. To their credit, didn't believe the official line from Obama, which was, "We're just going to bomb a little bit and leave."
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't believe it.
And Martin Dempsey,
because it wasn't true.
well, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the time was saying, no fly zones are wars, and he actually laid out how, yeah, it's a war. I mean, it's nothing magic. There are no magic no fly zones. But it was the people of the United States who I've heard some politicians say it was unprecedented how the reaction that they got, actually not completely unprecedented. There was one other time, that was right after the financial crisis. People were against the bailouts of the banks.
Right.
One of two times in modern times when, people just really rose up, pounded on their congressfolk. And I thought the notable part of that was how many active military were calling anonymously, or maybe Walter Jones kept them anonymous, but he had never seen that happen before. So that's just another illustration of how the all-volunteer army and the fake war on terror, the empire preservation wars, are not sustainable, particularly an expanding empire. I mean,
well,
there's never been an empire this big before, right?
But Joanne, I mean, the solution to that is clear. The solution to that is emphasis on JSOC, which has already happened, and how much of this can we automate? How much of this can we get people out of the equation? See what Colin Powell said in the wake of Vietnam. He said, what we realized is we lost this war on TV, and we realized we needed a volunteer army because the draft was killing us in Vietnam. That's why the people turned against the war, because they want to be drafted. And what we need to do is have a professional military, rebuild this thing, and have a very limited forces, and have it professional, and get people. We cannot have a high body count. And in Desert Storm, 1991 war, they achieved it. There was very few U.S. casualties, extremely low, and the American people loved it.
But they got
didn't
out.
want to see a body count. Well, they got out too, but I'm saying that they understand the high body count has a consequence. That's one of the reasons they want to automate. So if they can automate this enough, if they can get not just aerial drones, but sort of humanoid drones too, which I know sounds like science fiction, but then again, doesn't killer drones sound like science fiction? But but if they can do that, then they're cool. That's what they're racing towards. They're racing towards finding a way to continue the empire, but have a lower body count. So they see Wilkerson's point that he's making and say, oh, the solution to that isn't to wind down the empire. The solution to that is to have less people involved.
Yep. I
that's
totally agree with you. I just had a conversation with my son the other day, and I said that, all the self-driving technology, I think it's not being driven, it's not advancing as fast and such a high priority just because for any benevolent reason. I think it's a move toward automation of I don't want to. I don't even want to get into that's. I'm going to go off on a tangent. I don't really want to go down. I do want to talk about it, but not right now. It's going to take too long.
Okay,
But
well,
yeah, I think. I mean,
let's
just
just say the
because you
biggest
had,
contractor is always the. I mean, let's just put little thing in here about the cost of empire, and this is perhaps something people don't know that Noam Chomsky talks about a lot, which is new technology. You know, the Defense Department isn't maintains empire, but it's also this big structure, this big kind of machine to create new technologies. And one of the ways it does that isn't just by paying these public-private partnerships, which is how the internet develops cellular technology, the computer, GPS, which has all become civilian uses, is they're the buyers too. They're the contractors. So when new tech comes out and these companies say, who's going to pay for this shit that we're creating, that we're spending all this money developing? The government goes, we'll pay for it.
yeah,
So a lot of these autonomous driving, these automated driving systems, the big contracts, they're not aiming for the consumer market yet. They're aiming for government contracts because that's who's got the money for to pay for version 1.0 before it can become automated cars and anything else. So the government isn't just playing, they're also playing a startup game, by the way, for people who don't know. The CIA has a venture capital fund
yeah,
for spy technology. It's called InQtel. And the CIA has been doing this for a long time. Anybody ever heard of the company Oracle? Oracle was developed by Larry Ellison to become one of the biggest companies in the world. It's originally off a CIA program. So, you know, all this Silicon Valley itself is just one big
yeah. As time
repository
goes
of
by,
defense
I think we're going to
technology.
find out. We're going to find out more companies that were seeded by the intelligence. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
Anyway, so just to do the point about the cost of empire and what you were talking about, which is you better believe the tech, the empire and the Pentagon has been a central planning body, which they'll never admit to, even though it's an industrial policy. I mean, look at how the drone, people say there's no technology anymore. Where's the rocket packs? Well, look at drone technology. Who underwrote Boston Dynamics and all these companies? It is the Defense Department. That's where that $700 billion a year goes. So they're not just taking money away from a potential welfare state or social programs. They are distorting the technological development process rather from a civilian use where we can talk about medical advancements and other things like that, or creature comforts or safer driving, and it is the first contracts go out to defense applications. So if you're a young technologist and you're looking for a big contract, or you're an established brand who needs to develop in a new market, you're looking at the government.
For sure.
That's the big money. And they play a very strong role. And that's part of the money that they had to do that with is tax money that goes in.
And that is sort of brings us full circle because that's one of the intangible costs of empire. But it's huge. You know, it's huge. So the conundrum, the dilemma for, I don't know what you want to call them, the powers that be, the 1%, is that they want to have the vast majority of the wealth and power, but they're greatly outnumbered, right? Because and why don't they just kill everybody off? Well, one, they have to. Well, it was Jay Gould, one of the
Can we pay
robber
half the working
barons,
class? Yeah,
said,
we can
"I'll
always pay
pay
half
the
the working
working
class.
class, half of the working class, to kill off the other half." But they need servants and stuff. They need people to do the work.
For now,
Yeah, but
look at those robot sex bot servants. They
yeah,
won't
so
need anybody.
it's like the ultimate solution, isn't it? Yeah,
Well, they do
but
love the
yeah,
environment. These damn humans are polluting everything. That was what the what was it, Prince? One of the princes in England said. These problem with human expansion in Africa is eroding the environment. So
that sounds like something Charles would gaff.
I thought it was the sun, but whatever. In any case,
Oh,
yeah,
Will or Harry? Okay. Yeah, I didn't
yeah, I
hear
thought it
that
was.
one.
So in any case, yeah, I don't think there's any grand plot about it. It's just there is a surplus population, and as automation does kick up, you're wondering what's going to happen to these people who work in factories. They've already played the game of outsourcing to the lowest common denominator, but sooner rather than later, a peasant in China or somewhere else is not going to be able to compete with a machine. So then, what do you do with all these poor sons of bitches who can't get a job anymore? What happens when you don't need these poor workers anymore? It's going to be a big question in the 21st century.
All right, well, I think we should probably wrap this up.
On that happy note, on the cost of empire and American geopolitics. So that's our show. Thank you for listening. Questions, complaints, want to yell at me, Dan at aroundtheempire.com. Please visit our website, aroundtheempire.com. If you'd like to contribute to the show, please patreon.com/aroundtheempire. Follow us on Twitter. Follow Joanne at Joanne Leon, Leon, or at Around the Empire, or follow me at US Empire Show. See you next time.
Take care, everyone.